Anyway, welcome to Rooted tonight. With you as always, my name is Dustin Payne. I'm so grateful for everyone joining us tonight. I know it's a pretty big commitment it's just everybody lives busy lives, and so it's a big commitment to come here on Thursdays and just say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna worship with other young adults. And so thank you for coming. Thank you for choosing Rooted. I'm very grateful. So the last 3 weeks, we've been having a series called God Called Me. And so 3 weeks ago, we interviewed Jonah and talked about how God called him into ministry. And then we interviewed Zane and talked about how God called him into ministry. And then last week, we talked with my mom and stepdad about how God called them into adoption. And so tonight, we're going to continue that series, but we're going to go from real life experiences that we experience now to real life experiences in Bible times. And so we're going to see how Jesus called Peter and what he called him to do. And so before we get started tonight, let's bow our heads. Father, I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful for this opportunity just to stand up here and preach your word, Lord. I'm so grateful that you called me to this. I'm so grateful that you chose me out of everyone, that you chose me to be here tonight in Ina, Illinois, preaching your word, Father. And Lord, I pray that as I'm up here, everything that I say would be from you. It wouldn't be my own ideas or push my own agenda, but it would just push your words, Father, that they would be all breathed out through you, for you, by you, Father. In your name I pray, amen. And so before this, I was talking to a couple of guys about baseball, because of course it's baseball season, right? I know some of us watch baseball in here, some of us probably don't, but I can guarantee, actually 1,000%, 100% know that none of us were watching baseball when this guy played, and the guy's name is Billy Sunday, because he played from 1883 to 1890, so just a little bit before we were all born. But he grew up in a small town in Iowa. His dad died when he was just a young baby, and him and his mom grew up very, very poor. But good thing for Billy, he could run pretty fast, he could hit a baseball pretty far, and he could hit it so good that he ended up in Chicago playing for the White Sox. But at the time, they were actually called the White Stockings, not the White Sox. But anyway, so he got to play there, and he played there for about 6 seasons. Then he went to Pittsburgh, and then he went to Philadelphia. But as he was walking down the streets of Philadelphia, there was this street evangelist. And he began to share the gospel with Billy. And so he was just a normal guy. I mean, of course, Billy was he went to the major leagues, but he was just really just a normal guy. And that day, Jesus used this guy that was preaching on the street to change him forever. Because that day, Billy gave his life to Christ, and he didn't just give his life to Christ, he gave up everything that he had for Christ. That year, he quit playing baseball and went into vocational ministry full-time. He didn't have a seminary degree. He didn't go to college. He just said, you know what, this is what God's calling me to do, and I'm going to go do it. So he used the Holy Spirit and his fireness and his passion to tell everyone he could about Jesus. And so he was a pastor from 1890 to 1935, and they say that it was estimated around 1 million people responded to his altar calls over his life. Over 100 million people he got to share the gospel with. And every time that he preached, there was crowds from 10,000 to 20,000 people per night. And let's think about how it started. Billy grew up just a poor kid in Iowa. And God took something that was ordinary, this guy that was just an ordinary guy, and did something extraordinary with him. Did something crazy, like unthinkable with him. Like I always got to thinking about this. If I got to be a professional athlete, how hard for me would it be to turn that down to follow Jesus? And that was convicting to me. If I got a chance to play for the Georgia Bulldogs, everybody knows I'm a big college guy, love college football, love the Georgia Bulldogs. If I get a chance to play and start for the Georgia Bulldogs, would I turn that down to follow Jesus? And I don't know the answer to that. And that's scary to me. But Billy did. And Billy gave it up to follow Jesus. And so tonight we're going to be in Luke chapter 5, and we're going to be looking at this guy named Peter, who was just an ordinary guy. What he did for work, he was a fisherman, and God called him. He took this ordinary guy named Peter and did something extraordinary with him. So let's start reading Luke chapter 5. It says this. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing on him, meaning Jesus, to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake, and he saw two boats by the lake. But the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. So Jesus got into one of them, which was Simon's. So when the Bible says Simon, it's talking about Simon Peter. So you're going to see Peter and Simon, same guy. He asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. So here's what's going on. Jesus is preaching to people, and he's got a huge crowd. He's got such a big crowd. He's like, I got to get in the lake to get away from these people because they're going to surround me, and I don't know what they're going to do, but it's just too much. And so he finds these boats, and one of them is Peter's. And so he gets in this boat, and Peter and his boys take him out to the lake. And so Jesus is preaching on the boat to the people. And here's what's crazy about this, okay? Peter wasn't a disciple yet. If you know Peter and you know the Bible, you know that Peter was one of the 12 disciples. This is before that. Peter didn't know Jesus, at least didn't have a close relationship with Jesus at the time. He may have heard about him, but didn't know him, probably never met him. Peter wasn't in a synagogue or in a church. Peter was in a boat. He was fishing. And Jesus met him where he was at. Jesus went to him and met him. And that's what happens in our lives. Is Jesus is going to meet us where we're at. That's my first point tonight, is Jesus meets us where we're at. Like I said, Jesus didn't call Peter from a synagogue or a seminary or a place of religious status. He met him in a fishing boat doing his everyday job. And he was probably tired and frustrated because he spent all night trying to catch fish that they didn't catch any. And so how many times in our life are we working and we're frustrated and we're tired? And most of us think, oh, there's no way Jesus can show up, but he will, and he can. And I don't know about you, but I know my testimony. When I first had that real relationship with Jesus, man, I was in a valley. I had nowhere else to turn. The land was just crumbling under my feet, it felt like. And guess who showed up? Jesus. And so we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be at the perfect place. We don't have to. Jesus will come to you. He shows up where you're at. And think about this. We don't have to be in the right place at the right time, because Peter wasn't praying. Peter wasn't fasting. Peter wasn't preaching yet. He was doing his job. He was washing off the nets from the night before. He was about to pull his boat in and go home and probably get some sleep. Like, he was just doing his job. He wasn't expecting this divine moment like Jesus showing up. And Jesus meets us where we're at, and he shows up when we least expect it sometimes. Jesus is there. And I'm not going to say that we shouldn't pray or we shouldn't fast or we shouldn't do those things, because it's like, oh, well, Jesus will come even if I don't do those things. Like, you should still do those things because we're called to do that. But I'm just saying, regardless if you do it, if you don't do it, when you do it and when you're not doing it, Jesus is there regardless. He's there when you're doing it, and he's there when you're not doing it. Let's keep reading. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets." So let's think about this, okay? So Peter, of course, this is his job. This is what he does for a living. This is how he makes a living, as he catches fish. He's a fisherman, right? That's on his resume, fisherman. That's what he does. And so I know he didn't have a bass tracker, he didn't have a bait caster, he didn't have a depth finder, like he didn't have all of the bells and whistles that we have now, but I guarantee he's been taught how to catch fish. He knows the techniques and where to look for them and the places to go. Like, he knows what he's doing. And so when Jesus said, hey, try over there, try to the right of the boat, there's a part of him that's like, you don't understand. Jesus is like, I get it. You're teaching all these things and you may be the son of God. I understand this, but I'm the expert. Like, I'm the fisherman. How many times in our life do we like, God, you don't understand. I know best. You don't get it, God. Like, I'm here right now. I understand what I need to do. And God's like, no. You need to do this. Because we don't see the big picture. We don't get what God's big plan for us. Sometimes we can't see what he's got planned for us. And neither did Peter, but guess what Peter did? He listened. And what we're going to find out, the second point today, is calling often follows obedience. A calling often follows obedience, because Peter obeyed even though he didn't understand. There's this pastor named Andy Stanley out of Atlanta, and he said this, there's sometimes that people don't understand why we have to obey the Bible, and he said this, he said, submit and abide to understand why. To understand why, submit and abide. And that's exactly what Peter did, because guess what? It says this, and when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. They caught so much fish that both of the boats began to sink. That's how much fish they caught. And that was overwhelming to them. Like Jesus doing that, it blew all of their expectations out the window. I'm sure that even if they had caught just a small number of fish, it would probably be like, okay, Jesus, that's awesome. Thank you so much. But Jesus goes, no, I'm going to go a step further, and I'm going to give you so much that you can't even pull it back, that your boats are going to be sinking. So you know how wonderful and how grateful I am, and how graceful I am. Because here's what happens. When Jesus moves in our lives, we start to recognize the godliness of God and the sinfulness of sin. Because here's what Peter does. Peter fell down. When all this happened, he said, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Like, Jesus, you better go because you don't want this sin to rub off on you. Because that's how bad of a person I am. You don't even want to be seen with me, Jesus. That's how bad I am. Because when we experience something like that, when we have a true encounter with Jesus, it humbles us. Because we realize how great God actually is and how bad our sin is. I've said this so many times. Like, you think about this. To be saved, we have to realize that we are not good enough, that we're bad people, that we're horrible people, and we got to realize how great God is and how wonderful He is and what He can do in our lives. And maybe it's not going to be catching a bunch of fish like Peter, but He's going to show us how great He is. And so that's my third point, is true encounters with Jesus reveals our sins in His holiness. I believe everybody's testimony has that point of humility, of having that humble points in our life. And if you don't have that humility point, I would reconsider if you really know the gospel. If you don't have that point where you're just humble and you're faced with humility and you're like, okay, God, I know that I'm not good enough, I would question if you understand what the gospel is and what Jesus did for our lives. And so Peter says, get away from me. I'm a sinful man. You don't understand what kind of person I am. And instead of running from Peter's sin, because sometimes there's some of us that we're around that person and they're like sinning and we just want to leave, right? But instead of doing that, instead of Jesus like running away from Peter's sin, you know what He does? He's about to call him into service. And Jesus said this to Peter. He said, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. So you know what Jesus did? Jesus shifted Peter's identity from fisherman to disciple maker. Like, think about this. They just caught one of the biggest catches, like a career catch. Like the biggest, the most fish you could think of. They just caught it. It's like getting that big promotion that you were always wanted. You got it. Like, I can't believe I just got this. Is a dream job, and you just got it. Or like you just got to bid on the biggest duck cleaning project, and you just got it. Or, you know what, you just got that big promotion at the hospital, or you just got the boss's job at Cecily janitor, right? Like, you got whatever you wanted. It's there, the biggest thing, and guess what? You walk away from it. It's exactly what Peter did. The biggest thing in his career, and he walks away and follows Jesus. And now, I'm not going to tell you tonight that Jesus is saying, quit your job and follow him. Maybe he is. Maybe he absolutely is calling you to quit your job and follow him in full-time vocational ministry, going overseas as a missionary, being here as a missionary. I don't know. But what I do know is that regardless if he tells you to quit your job or not, we are all called to be ministers of the gospel where we're at. We're no longer just vet techs or IT guys or janitors or carpenters. We're no longer duck cleaners. We're no longer just GT workers. We're no longer just that. We serve a higher purpose. We spread the gospel. We work for him. And so are we called to quit our jobs and go? No, but we are called to give up our desires, give up our motives, to follow Jesus and tell people about him. And so when Peter gave up everything, obviously it was risky. It was complete surrender, like total surrender. Like, think about it. He didn't just give up his whole life or what he wanted. He gave up his job, his livelihood. Like, how is he going to pay for bills now? Like, he gave up everything and just said, God, I trust you. Jesus, I trust you. And how many times in our life have we made decisions that were like, if God doesn't exist, this isn't going to work? Or we do something that's like, this would be completely insane if God didn't exist. Because wouldn't that be completely insane if Jesus wasn't really the Son of God? Giving up everything to follow this guy? How many times in our life have we done that? Have we stepped out on faith and says, if God's not real, I don't know how this is going to work. And maybe even it's like, you know what? I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm going to trust in God that he's got me, that he's going to make it work. I don't know how, but he's got it. This is the model of discipleship, leaving behind our own plans for something better. Even though Peter was called by Jesus, guess what? He wasn't perfect. So we see this story, right, depicted in Luke, that Jesus calls Peter and he says, Peter, you're going to be a fisherman of men, not a fish of men. You're going to work for me. And so you're like, okay, story stops right there. Peter becomes this awesome man of faith. He does no wrong. No. In Matthew 14, Peter starts to, they're on a boat and the wind is getting crazy and there's a storm happening and they see somebody walking on water and they're like, it's a ghost. Like, it's a ghost. Who is that? And she's like, hey, it's me. And Peter's like, if it's really you, Jesus, tell me to come out there. He said, come on. So Peter starts walking on water and then the waves start to crash. And he starts doubting Jesus and he starts to sink. And by this time, this is a little well after that Jesus called Peter the first time. And so Peter's been following Jesus everywhere he goes from town to town. He's been living right next to Jesus. Like, him and Jesus are boys. Like, they're buddies. And so you would think that Peter got to see all these great miracles that Jesus was doing and all the great words that he was preaching, and he still doubts Jesus. He still doubts him. But then right after that, a couple chapters later, we read that Jesus says this. He is asking everyone, he says, hey, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And he said to them, but who do you say that I am? And Peter says, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Listen to what Jesus said. Blessed are you, Simon, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So Peter just doubted Jesus 2 chapters away, right? He 2 chapters ago, he just doubted Jesus. And then he said, well, you're the Son of God. You're the Christ. That's who you are. And he's like, yeah, you got the keys, buddy. You're going to build this church. And you're like, okay. Simon didn't mess up again, right? Like, he's the man. He's going to build this church, and he's perfect. Because so oftentimes when we see people on this pulpit preaching the gospel, we want to put them on a pedestal and be like, they must do no wrong. Like, he's a preacher of God. He doesn't mess up. He must be better than just a normal human being. And you know what happens to Peter? Right before, it's depicted in Matthew 26, right before Jesus is going to get crucified and die on a cross. They're going and they're arresting Jesus, and they go to Peter and they're like, hey, I know you were with Jesus. And he's like, no, not me, man. You got the wrong dude. And he's like, no. I know you were with Jesus. I know that's not me. Not me. One more time, he said, no. I know you were with Jesus. And then he cursed and said, it's not me. He just denied his boy, one of his best friends. The Son of God, Jesus. He just denied. He's like, I don't even know who he is. I have no idea who that guy is. Think about that 3 times. The same Peter that Jesus said, I will build my church on you, on this rock. I will build my church. I'm going to give you the keys. And then he said, I don't even know who you are. How many times is that in our lives? We're so excited to follow Jesus, and Jesus does something good, and then we're like, I don't even know who you are. I just want to protect my own skin. I just want to do my thing. I want to do what I want to do. And we just deny Jesus. But here's the great thing. Here's the amazing thing. It doesn't matter how many times we screw up. Jesus is a graceful God. It says, for by grace we have been saved through faith. It's not our own works. We have grace. We serve a graceful God that time and time again when we mess up and we run after our fleshly desires, Jesus is like, here I am. Run back to me. Run back to me. Now here's the thing. I know at the beginning I said Jesus meets us where we're at, but we can't stay where we're at. Once we encounter Jesus, we want to keep running forward. We don't want to stay where we're at. We want to keep pursuing him and running after him. And yes, time again, we're going to mess up like Peter, but we're going to keep running forward. And you think after Peter denied Jesus and Jesus died on the cross, you think Jesus was like, okay, I'm done with you, Peter. You just denied me. You know what happens? Peter gets upset. And Peter's like, I can't believe I've done this. This is my failure. I can't believe it. And Jesus died on the cross. And so you know what he does? I'm going to go back to fishing. I'm going to go be a fisherman again. I'm going to go back to my job that I had before Jesus called me. I'm going to go do that. So he was out there fishing, and you know what happened? Jesus showed up, and he said, hey, they weren't catching anything. And Jesus did the same thing again. He's like, hey, we tried over there. Put your nets in over there. And they threw their nets in, and guess what happened? They caught a bunch of fish. And then they realized that it was Jesus. And so they went to Jesus, and Jesus said, Peter, do you love me? He said, Jesus, you know I love you. Peter, do you love me? He said, Jesus, you know I love you. And Jesus said again, Peter, do you love me? Peter's getting frustrated. He's like, Jesus, you know I love you. And he's like, go do my will. Go do my will. You see, what Jesus just did is Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and Jesus allowed him to be restored. And you know what happened to Peter? In the book of Acts, if you've ever read the book of Acts, it was just a huge breakout. Revival just breaking out everywhere. Like the Church of Christ was truly born in the book of Acts. You can see this. And all of this was happening, and Peter had a huge part of it. In Acts chapter 3, he healed a lame man. Acts chapter 10, he opened the gospel to Gentiles. Acts 15, at the Council of Jerusalem, Peter advocated for Gentile believers. He was leading the early church. In Acts chapter 2 is the preaching at the Pentecost where 3,000 people got saved in one place. So even though Peter messed up time and time again, God said, I'm not done with you. I got you. I'm going to use you. And so it doesn't matter what our past is. It doesn't matter if we mess up. We just got to keep running after Jesus. And Jesus is going to use us. So the good thing is we don't have to be special. We don't have to do special things and make sure that we're in the right spot. I think sometimes, like even tonight, I'll be honest with you, okay? I've had a busy week. This weekend, I went to Knoxville, Tennessee for a wedding, and then I came back, and we had a lot of estimates to do and a lot of jobs, and I had 2 sermons to preach and a Sunday school lesson and a class next week because I'm going to Camp Hope. So I just had a bunch of things going on. And I'm like, God, I need to pray like multiple times a day because if I don't pray, then my sermon won't be right because maybe I didn't spend enough time on it. And I just start to think, okay, did I do things the right way? And it's like, no. I'm just going to serve God. I'm not going to worry about if I'm doing little things the right way. I'm just going to pursue Jesus. Because sometimes you're like, God, did you hear my prayer? Because I want to make sure that I say it the right way, and I want to make sure that I say the right thing so that he could hear me. Because if I don't say it like this, then he was not going to listen. And it's like, no, just pray. It's never going to be perfect. Just give it to God. Just give it to him. Let's bow our heads.